Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I hope you're doing well as well, and I hope life is treating you kindly. So before we get started, you know the rules, go and get yourself something spectacular to drink, and if it's something unusual, let me know about it. But before we get started, remember this is part 2 of our story. So if you haven't heard part 1, click on the description because you don't want to miss the entire story. So let's continue with part 2 of our story.
"What was all that about?" asked Mr. Goodfellow, noticing that Zack was trembling. "You've gone as white as a sheet. Are you all right, son?" "Who is she?" asked Zack. "You mean that old woman that you've just been speaking to?" Zack nodded. "Do you know her?" "Can't say I do, son. Never seen her a day in my life. Why do you ask?" "She was standing by the walking shoes. I thought she might want to buy something for her grandchild or something. I went over to ask her if she needed my help. I can't believe what she actually said to me." "Ah, I see. She got offended because you thought she was a grandmother," chuckled Mr. Goodfellow. "I've seen that before. People sometimes convince themselves they look half their age. No, that's not what I mean, Mr. Goodfellow. She was standing over there. Her eyes went white, and then she spoke to me in a strange masculine voice, as if she was possessed by something. She told me to be careful, that I was in danger, that something was after my blood. And then get this, Mr. Goodfellow. Then she acted completely normal, as if nothing had just happened. And then more or less said she didn't understand why she'd come into our store in the very first place." "My goodness gracious me," said Mr. Goodfellow, rubbing his moustache reflectively. "That is decidedly creepy. Who needs to read Stephen King's The Shining when you've got people like her walking into our store? To give us the chills, thank you very much. Look at me. I've actually got goosebumps after what you've told me. And not in a good way either. That is freaky. Wait until I tell the wife about this tonight. She probably won't be able to eat her dinner. My wife gets very rattled over creepy things, but she loves hearing about them nevertheless." "Mr. Goodfellow, should I be worried about what she told me?" "What about, son?" "Well, about what she told me, when she said that I was in danger, and something was after my blood." Mr. Goodfellow patted Zack's back affectionately, and let out a loud laugh. "No, of course not, Zack. She was a silly old demented woman, probably croaking a bunch of nonsense. Don't believe a word of it. Of course not. You're in no danger. Now, on a more positive note, have you found a place to take your girlfriend for her birthday?" "No, I haven't, Mr. Goodfellow. Everything is far too expensive. I can't afford anything." "I am sure, Zack, something will turn up," said Mr. Goodfellow. "In my experience, it always does." Zack was not convinced by Mr. Goodfellow's constant optimistic outlook, as he did not believe that good things randomly turned up by chance. But he was in for a pleasant surprise. He was displaying the different torches and means of illumination on a large shelf. Some were solar-powered, others with chargers or batteries, when Mrs. von Grietersen entered the shop. She was a regular customer who loved to buy all kinds of quirky gadgets for her 3 grown-up grandsons. This morning she looked very upbeat. She was a robust woman who was as strong as an ox, and who, although in her early 60s, was as fit as a fiddle. She always wore bright dresses with bold flowery designs, and a plethora of beads around her neck. Zack secretly suspected that Mrs. Angel von Grietersen really rather fancied Mr. Goodfellow, and was looking for any excuse to have a good old chinwag with the man. Mr. Goodfellow always enjoyed chatting with his customers, and was genuinely pleased to see Mrs. Angel von Grietersen. Zack had often privately wondered why a mother would ever dream of calling their child Angel, but he would soon realize that Angel von Grietersen's name was most apt, given the woman would prove to be an unsuspecting angel for him on a normal Tuesday afternoon. "How are you, Angel?" Mr. Goodfellow asked her, I'm actually doing very well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to tell you. I was rather poorly last week. Some mysterious bug got me down. But thankfully, since yesterday, I've been on top form. Glad to hear it, Angel. You look great. Thank you, Niles. You do say the sweetest things, don't you? I know where to come when my flagging ego needs a boost. Just come to outdoor adventures, it would seem. Before long, she was talking to Mr. Goodfellow about a dinner party she had the previous night that turned out to be a great success. Do you know, I thought the dessert was going to be an absolute catastrophe, she explained. I made a pavlova with cream and fruit, but it all just broke apart in my hands. It was my daughter's idea to crunch it all up, put it in glass goblets, fold the meringue in with fruit and cream, and decorate it with strawberries. And get this, it was the best dessert everyone has ever tasted. Everyone was asking me for the recipe. My daughter tells me it's a genuine dessert in England. It's called Eton mess, would you believe? You fold meringue, fruit and cream together and put it in glass goblets and serve at once. It tastes absolutely amazing. You don't want to leave it in the refrigerator for hours because the meringue will dissolve. I gather a chef in the UK had a similar experience with broken meringue and fruit, and he did the same thing as I did, put it in goblets. So that is when Eton mess was born. Sounds intriguing, said Mr. Goodfellow. I certainly shall give that a try. Oh, you've got to do it, Niles. It is delicious. All of a sudden, a cell phone in her handbag began to drill away, and she raised her hand to Mr. Goodfellow. You don't mind awfully, do you, if I get this, Niles? Absolutely not, Angel. You go ahead. Mrs. Angel Greeterson, who was a tad disorganized, began wrestling with her large leather purse to extract her cell phone. She quickly brought it over to the counter and began pulling all kinds of supercilious items onto the glass surface. A couple of them made Mr. Goodfellow raise a questionable brow. In particular the corkscrew, a small jar of bacon-flavoured mayonnaise, a baby's rattle, some Vicks Vapor Rub, some tissues, a powder puff, a Diamante leather dog collar and matching lead, Christian Dior's red lipstick, and some La Prairie hand cream. It was mind-boggling what clandestine secrets lay buried within the depths of a woman's purse. And Mrs. Van Greeterson's cell phone lay at the very bottom, like a wishful coin in the Trelly fountain, carrying a dream on the wings of its burnished surface. Mrs. Van Greeterson finally found her cell phone among the tangle of disordered chaos. The annoying cell phone with its god-awful ringtone was even beginning to annoy the customers in the store, who were glancing in her direction with that please shut that thing off kind of look in their wary eyes. She was almost out of breath when she finally grabbed the phone and hurriedly answered it. Relief swept over the entire store, like a cool, refreshing wind on a hot summer's day, when the jarring noise finally stopped. Zack could not believe that anyone in their right mind would have such an annoying ringtone, but maybe Mrs. Van Greeterson had bad hearing and had no concept how dreadful that shrill sound actually was. One thing was for sure, it never got boring here at Outdoor Adventures. Yes, it's Angel here. Who is this? Said Mrs. Van Greeterson, speaking loudly into the phone. Sorry, I can't hear you. Who is this? If you can hear me, I think you should try phoning me again. All I can hear is static, I'm afraid. Oh, that's so much better. Yes, I can hear you. Oh, is that you, Terence? Whereabouts are you? It's my grandson, she said, glancing up at Mr. Goodfellow, giving him a wink. Yes, sweetheart, what is it? Yes, I can still hear you, but the reception is quite dreadful, it really is. I'm here at the Outdoor Adventure shop. I was thinking of buying you a nice jacket for your trip to the cabin. What size should I get? A medium large, do you think? Mrs. Goodfellow made a disappointed face. Oh, my word, that really is bad news. What is wrong with her? Well, it can't be helped, can it? Don't you worry about me, dear. Of course I'm not offended. What are you taking me for? I'm your grandmother. No, I won't get my money back. It's paid in full, but it really doesn't matter. It's one of those fortuitous things, isn't it? Maybe it just was not meant to be. But I hope the operation goes well for her, and that she feels better. Do please send her my love. Oh, it is a very sad thing to happen. But these things happen in life, don't they, sweetheart? Anyway, I'll speak to you soon. Oh dear, said Mrs. von Grieterson, putting her cell phone in her purse and pulling a sad face. What is it, Angel? Asked Niles Goodfellow, looking concerned. You look as if someone's hit you across the face with a baseball bat. Are you sure you're all right? Oh, I hope I don't look as bad as you claim. I'm just a tad disappointed, that's all. It was my grandson Terrence's 30th birthday. I booked a pretty little cabin for him as a present, and for his wife Jane, for them to go for the weekend together. Well, his wife has only gone and broken her leg. She fell down the staircase after tripping over their dog. She has to have an operation. A couple of the bones need to be realigned, you see. God only knows what she did to herself, poor thing. I did warn her about that Labrador dog of hers. He's always getting under her feet. The long and the short is they're not going to go to the cabin this coming weekend, and those walking trails will be off limits to them anyway. I've paid for the cabin in full, but it's now going to waste. It seems a dreadful shame, doesn't it? Such a charming place it was, too, in the Georgian countryside. I think I've mentioned it to you before. I wouldn't mind going there myself, but you know my husband. He's not desperately outdoorsy. The closest he gets to going outdoors is in virtual sports, you know. What's that? Asked Mr. Goodfellow, looking nonplussed. Is that some online game that I've never heard of before? But then I'm not computer savvy, so I wouldn't know about that kind of thing. Oh, no, nothing like that. It's watching his sports programs on television, you know, ice hockey, football, stuff like that. Mr. Goodfellow's back straightened. He made a strange sound at the back of his throat. You were saying, Angel, that the cabin has been paid for in full and is going free. Is that right? Oh, absolutely. That is right, she said, looking at Mr. Goodfellow with bright eyes. You don't want it, do you, Niles? It seems such a dreadful waste not to use the charming place. Would you like to take your lovely wife there? Everything's been paid for, and I would be so delighted if someone made use of it. I've booked the cabin in the past for friends of mine as gifts, all who have raved about it. It's so charming, idyllic, you know, like a fairy tale. The location is awfully romantic. If that is the case, Angel, I think Zack over here would be very interested in taking his girlfriend to this cabin you're talking about. He's been wanting to take her somewhere special for her birthday, but money is very tight for him. So if you're saying your place is going spare, and you're certain you can't get your money refunded, well, I'm very sure Zack would be more than delighted to enjoy the benefits of the cabin. Isn't that right, Zack? Zack nodded, with a look of bemusement on his face. Mrs. von Grieterson opened her wallet, pulling out a piece of paper and a set of keys. That's for the cabin, Zack, and this paper contains the address of the place. I would be so terribly delighted if you would stay there on my behalf. It means that my money has been put to good use, and gives me great pleasure to know you will thoroughly enjoy the place, and that I can assure you you will. Mrs. von Grieterson, this is very kind of you, but I don't know if I can afford to pay you back. Don't you know the meaning of the word free, Zack? Said Mrs. von Grieterson. You don't need to pay me a thing. Now don't look a gift horse in the mouth, will you? Take that lovely girlfriend to the cabin, and incidentally, it's fully equipped. The food will be in the refrigerator, and make sure, only one thing, and that is that you have a very good time. Mrs. von Grieterson, I don't know what to say. You're an absolute angel, said Zack, giving the woman an impulsive hug. You have no idea what this means to me. I've been struggling to think of a place to take my girlfriend to, and this cabin is the answer to all my dreams. Well, I'm not called Angel for nothing, am I? She chuckled. Mrs. Van Grieterson, the name rarely becomes you. Thank you, Zack. That's the sweetest thing that anybody's ever said to me. Just make sure you enjoy yourself. That's all I ask. Well, we most certainly will, Mrs. Van Grieterson. See, said Mr. Goodfellow, when Mrs. Van Grieterson had finally left the shop, wishing Zack well. Did I not tell you something good would come up? And before you ask, yes, you can have the weekend off. Zack still felt rather shell-shocked about his good fortune when he phoned Eva to tell her the good news, that he was whisking her away for a surprise weekend. Somehow he'd have to persuade his dad to lend him his car, but that was a small bridge to cross, one he was sure he would overcome with a little persuasion. Zack's account. I was very excited about taking my girlfriend Eva to the cabin that Mrs. Van Grieterson had booked. She had spoken about it a great deal when she visited our store on multiple occasions. Oh, it's such a dreamy little cabin, she'd say, in the middle of these gloriously enchanting woods and far away from everything. It's so idyllic there, as pretty as a picture, like something out of a fairy tale. I remember thinking to myself that I wished I could take Eva to a place like that, but it would likely cost an arm and a leg, and at 21 years old I was not exactly flush with the cash, but I could dream, couldn't I? Mrs. Van Grieterson thoroughly enjoyed giving people weekend breaks as gifts, and she'd been booking Misty Hill's cabin for many years. I couldn't believe it when Mr. Goodfellow suggested to Mrs. Van Grieterson that she should let me and my girlfriend Eva stay at her cabin, or the cabin that she usually booked. It was situated in an exquisite wooded area, with the nearest town being Sonetta. It was like a gift from the gods that had serendipitously landed in my lap, thanks to Mr. Goodfellow's kind intervention on my behalf. It seemed Mrs. Van Grieterson was very pleased that someone would take advantage of the gift that she had purchased for her grandson and his wife. Oh dear, I'm so pleased, she said, looking at me gratefully, as if I was the one doing her a great favour, when in truth it was absolutely the other way round. Mrs. Grieterson, I said, why are you thanking me? I'm the one that needs to thank you. Let's just say a weekend break at the cabin is just what me and my girlfriend Eva really need, and I could never have afforded to take her to a place like this without your kindness. Oh, but you don't understand, Zack. You're the one doing me a favour. I feel thrilled that you'll be able to make use of the facilities. While I was delighted about the idea of staying at the cabin and the opportunities it presented for me and my girlfriend, the grotesque old woman I'd encountered, with the eyes that rolled back in her head, that turned a milky white colour, who told me that I was in danger and that something was after my blood, left me feeling very rattled. But I told myself to get a grip. She was a weird old lady after all, as batty as a fruitcake, whose words meant absolutely nothing. There was no reason to be apprehensive or to pay any attention to what she'd said to me. Maybe the old woman had been messing with me as some kind of warped, rather macabre joke. But how did anyone know how to turn their eyes white? And the voice she channeled, well, that was not normal. Be very careful, young man. Something is after your blood. You're in danger. You're in danger. Be very careful. Ha 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 ha. My parents were naturally thrilled. I was taking Eva on a weekend break. And believe it or not, my father said I could use his Range Rover to drive there. And let's just say it looked as if fate was finally smiling down upon me. So where are you taking me? Eva asked me. You're being so secretive. But I'm intrigued, Zack. All I'm telling you, I answered, is to look for a signpost that says Misty Hills. I gather it's very obscure, easy to miss, so I need you to keep your eyes pinned when we drive down some of those bumpy dirt roads. You think you can do that for me? But of course I can do that. I'll have you know I've got the eyes of an eagle. Nothing gets past my steely gaze. So you're in luck. The journey was over 2 hours by car. It wasn't a long drawn-out trip, which I was thankful for. We travelled down Interstate 85, I think it was. Me and Eva listened to music. Eva was addicted to 80s tracks, as growing up her mother played 80s music around the house all the time. So we were listening to all kinds of 80s hits. I mean, the lyrics and the beat was so good back then. The music had grown on me since I'd listened to it with Eva. It's so much better than the stuff they produce nowadays, she had assured me. We finally found ourselves weaving through a very wooded area, where the roads of asphalt had been taken over by weeds and grass, and were crumbling away. But my father's car was made for terrain like this. The rubber tyres bumped over dips and crevices in the road. It made our trip all the more exciting. The trees on the side of the road were hugging each other, with boughs outstretched above our heads, forming the beginnings of a canopy, but we could see the peppering of blue sky from between the branches. Then we saw a very obscure little path, leading through the trees, which I very nearly obliviously went rolling past in the Land Rover, had it not been for the sharp discerning eyes of my girlfriend. "I think that must be it," said Eva, pointing towards a tiny narrow path leading through the trees. "No, that can't be it," I said, shaking my head. "There would be a sign, wouldn't there? And the road is terribly narrow. It's just about big enough for my car to fit through, and that's about it." "But there's a sign, don't you see?" said Eva, pointing. "It's on the ground. It's been pulled out of the ground. It's upside down. That's really odd. I mean, it looks hefty, doesn't it? As if someone's yanked it straight out of the ground. I'll go and see what it says." "I'll check it out, shall I?" I watched as my girlfriend climbed out of the Land Rover, leaving her door slightly ajar. She walked towards the fallen sign on the side of the narrow path. She was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, as it was early summer, and the temperature was very pleasant. She turned around to look at me, her green eyes dancing with satisfaction. She lifted up her thumb. She was trying to pick up the sign, but it was way too heavy. She swanned back to the car, climbed into the passenger side door. "Good news, we found the place. This is it. The sign says Misty Hills. It's in great nick, the sign. I can't for the life of me comprehend how it's fallen to the ground like that. Something had to pull the sign out of the ground. I mean, who would do that? It's insane." "Maybe someone doesn't want us to find the place," I said teasingly. "Don't say that," said Eva, crinkling up her face. "That sounds so sinister. So are you going to tell me where we're going now that we're here? Or is it still a secret?" "Wait and see," I said, grinning cheekily. I had to be very careful to manoeuvre the car down that narrow path, because the tree branches could reach out and scratch the sides of my dad's car, and if I returned it to him in bad nick, I'd have to foot the bill for the damages, and I could not afford to let that happen. "So many trees," said Eva, who was constantly peering out of the window to direct me more to the right or left, depending on how close the tree branches were to the car. "They really should cut these branches right back," said Eva. "I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it, how narrow this path is? If your car were any more bigger, it would look as if it had had an unfortunate run-in with a cactus. It would be so messed up." Luckily, the narrow path eventually widened, and we drove through an open clearing, fringed by trees on every side, where we observed the most gorgeous-looking wooden cabin. It was Eva who let out an audible gasp when she saw the mesmerizing place. "Oh, my God! This is beautiful, Zach. It's like out of a fairy tale, isn't it? Where the hell did you manage to find a place like this? I thought we were going to a camping ground or something. But a place like this, it must have cost you an arm and a leg. How could you possibly afford it? I mean, this isn't even an old miner's cabin. It looks like a Swiss chalet, like something you would stay on in a luxurious ski resort." I grinned sheepishly. I was certainly not going to tell Eva about my lucky break. "Well, I have my ways," I told her. Eva reached out to give me a huge hug. "You know what, Zach? You never cease to amaze me. You were once an annoying mosquito to me, but you've turned into a prince. This place is brilliant, and I mean brilliant. I hope it's as charming on the inside as it is on the outside." "You'll have to see, won't you?" I said, handing Eva the key. "Why don't you go and have a look?" I was reasonably confident that the cabin would be exceedingly comfortable on the inside, but I can't say I was remotely prepared for the luxury that awaited us. On the outside, the cabin looked more like a Swiss chalet, as Eva had pointed out, as it was made entirely out of wood and was 2.5 stories high, with a low-pitched, wide, heavy roof that sloped downwards, a front gable, supported by decorative brackets, very large windows, and an upper and lower deck, overlooking the pretty views of the woods and, of course, the surrounding countryside, where rocks peered out of the grass, and wild, untamed, pretty flowers popped their buoyant heads through the rambling foliage. I was even more impressed with the interior of the cabin than the exterior. It was designed with comfort and luxury in mind, with large open fireplaces and cosy, sumptuous furnishings. But the attention to detail was startlingly impressive, with coordinated curtains and couches, and bright injections of colour, along with comfortable rugs, interesting throws, and bright pictures and tapestries on the walls. The kitchen was avant-garde and top of the range, with a sizable refrigerator stocked with food that made my mind boggle, from oysters on ice, cold langoustines, interesting pre-cooked pasta dishes, French champagne, and a plethora of ice-cold drinks from cokes to lemonade. When Eva opened the refrigerator to inspect the contents, her eyes popped open wide, and she said, "No way! You've got to be kidding me! How the hell could you afford this sack? I really don't understand. You're a poor student. How the hell?" I put my finger on my mouth. "Shh, Eva," I said. "Stop asking questions. Just enjoy yourself." When we slipped up the classic wooden staircase to the main bedroom, the bed was covered in rose petals, and vast arrangements of flowers were liberally displayed on the ornate wooden dresser. Eva just stood there gasping, her hand over her mouth. "Stop it! Stop it! Is this real, or am I imagining things? Tell me I'm not imagining things, Zach." She threw herself happily onto the large bed, covered with white Egyptian cotton bedding, and groaned ecstatically. "Oh my goodness, this bed is to die for! I think I've died and gone to heaven. It's so comfortable. I don't think I'm going to be able to get up in the morning. You'll have to drag me out of bed. This mattress is so dreamy." I pulled Eva up from the bed with a firm, commanding hand. "I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to unpack very quickly, have a refreshing drink, and take a walk down one of those trails in the woods. We didn't come all this way to be bone idle. Part of the fun is to go exploring. You like an adventure as much as I do, don't you, Eva?" "Must we?" said Eva, making an exaggerated, sorrowful face. "If I had my way, Zach, I'd lie in this bed all day long, drinking French champagne, eating oysters on ice, and tucking into langoustines with lemon butter and garlic." "We're going for a walk, Eva. It's part of the experience of being here. We can luxuriate as much as we like in the evening, and drink as much French champagne as you want." That morning we spent most of the day exploring one of the trails in the woods, and the woods were as prepossessing as the cabin itself, for nature had ensured her well-endowed bounty would be proudly displayed, as lofty trees towered up to the heavens in an elegant repose, not afraid to take up their positions in the ground, and to stretch out their sculptural boughs as wide and as high as they possibly could, as if competing against each other for as much light as they could gain. The canopy above our heads was fully shaded, as oaks and red maples tangled themselves together with a rambunctious enthusiasm as their boughs hooked into each other. There were open spaces between their verdant leaves that allowed soft prisms of sunlight to trespass the forest floor, showering everything in a peppering of ethereal light. The woodland trails were like a bridle path, covered with the pretty confetti of tired old leaves, now so firmly embedded in the ground that they were swiftly becoming like mouche, to become as rich and as dark as the fertile soil itself. There were gnarled roots poking obtrusively through the ground, and although sculptural and attractive to observe, they were treacherously dangerous if you were to get your foot snagged between them. There were jutting rocks poking through the ground rudely, pretty ferns with long peacock feathers of green lace, flowering, shade-loving plants and creepers that brushed their resplendent, weeping foliages across the earthen soil without much apology. The walk was blissful as me and my girlfriend kicked our hard rubber shoes over the soil, sometimes loosening up some of the leaf litter and the fallen twigs. The temperature was perfect, and the woodgrove was alive with pretty birdsong. There were signs of abundant life everywhere, insects flying around in the prisms of sunlight, deer droppings throughout the grove, as well as rabbits, squirrels and chipmunks, the former making a hasty escape on our approach, twitching their whiskers and nostrils nervously, and instinctively bounding away, as if perceiving our presence to be a threat. The squirrels in the trees were far less timid, and watched us curiously through brown, sparkling eyes, as their agile limbs gymnastically darted from one tree branch to another, and one of the squirrels appeared confidently to follow us, bouncing from one tree to another, with an untamed inquisitiveness that made me and Eva both laugh. There was a small, fast-moving stream in the woods that led to a large open pool of water that was as big and as sizable as a swimming pool, and was generously deep. It was surrounded by sculptural rocky outcrops, and twinkled in the light. There was a huge waterfall plundering over some deep rocky crevices, blasting into the water below with a mighty, powerful crashing sound. Me and my girlfriend remained in the rock pool, our bodies submerged in water up to our chests, our wet hair clinging to our faces. It was like we were seated in a theatre with popcorn on our laps, waiting for the curtains to swoosh open onto a scene that is so dramatic, and you know it's not going to be good. You inwardly grimace and bite your lip in nervous anticipation. It was like that for us. I could feel a creepy chill running down my spine, as a dreadful sense of foreboding overcame me, that was so overwhelming that it felt as if my legs were crumbling beneath me. The old woman I had met in the store recently, with her white eyes and the masculine growl that emanated from her throat, warning me that I was in danger, panelled into my head like a worm burrowing its way through an apple. It was as if all of a sudden I knew that this was the moment, the very moment that she'd been warning me about, the danger that had trespassed into my life so objectionably. Something really, really bad was about to happen, and I knew this with an ominous sense of prognostication that I have never sensed before or since. But my instincts were paralysed by a fear that rose up inside me like a high fever that refused to abate or even offer me relief. It would seem a profound sense of impending dread blew into my mind like an invasive wind. My bones rattled like branches on a tree. My heart quivered and shook like a plastic bag snagged on a briary bush that whips around in a heavy gale. I glanced briefly at my girlfriend, whose pale skin had grown significantly paler as all the blood had drained from her body. She was shivering not from the cold, but for the same sense of apprehension that had seized me. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling, her teeth chattering. We were frozen with fear that we both remained rooted to the spot in the water, as if mysterious tentacles had anchored our feet to the ground, rendering us unable to move. The first thing that grabbed our attention was the most horrifying smell that punctured the air with a repressive, murderous intent, for it hijacked every other smell in the woods with a cloying, torrid claustrophobia, so that any sweet bouquet on the wind had dwindled away, much like the light of the day appeared to have. The smell was so putridly malignant, so caustic that it burnt the back of our throats. It was a smell of death and decay. All of a sudden, me and my girlfriend knew we were being watched. I could feel eyes burning into me like blazing hot coals, fierce, vengeful eyes with a vindictive intent. I may not have seen anything, but something was there, and I knew it with every fibre of my being. My girlfriend emitted a loud wail, her voice trembling. "Something is there watching us! We've got to get out of here now!" My body stubbornly refused to oblige me, like a car that has completely run out of gas. I was stalling on my 2 feet. My girlfriend was not much better than me. And that was when we saw him, And oh my God, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. This was the kind of beast you would envisage as a child, the stuff made of the fabric of your worst nightmares. The only trouble was, this creature was real. It was a human-like wolf, standing up like a man on 2 feet, at over 7 foot tall, taut with muscle, covered with tight clusters of dark hair, although there were sizable open patches on his grey skin that looked distinctly like mange. The wolf-like humanoid possessed a treacherously intimidating dog-like muzzle, about 3 to 4 times the size of your average Rottweiler dog, very large upright ears, a long tail, and the darkest, most evil coal-coloured eyes that I've ever beheld. Those eyes told me at once that he was after my blood. He had no interest in my girlfriend. His nose was twitching. He was smelling the air, thoroughly enjoying the smell, basking in it. His deadly, undivided focus was pinned on me. It was me he wanted. And the hatred he expressed towards me was so tangible that it burnt into my very soul. Me and my girlfriend stood there like a couple of terrified mice, waiting for the cat to bite our heads off, one after the other, and resigning ourselves to our inevitable fate. I could feel warm water spilling out of my trunks, and I realized I'd wet myself. I was to find out later that Eva had done exactly the same, as in our fear our bladders became weak. The demonical wolf-like humanoid opened its powerful jaws to expose 2 rows of perilously sharp canine teeth. It would seem globlets of spittle drooled out of its mouth, as if it was salivating. His long, agile limbs skirted across the water like nimble water skis, and then with the proficiency and skill of an otter, it plunged under the water for a moment and was gone. Seconds later its hair-covered body brushed and prickled against my skin, and with one powerful arm he grabbed my leg, throwing me off my balance and submerging me under the water, so that for a second I was absolutely certain that I'd met my end. Then he let go of me, and I hurriedly rose to the surface, gasping, spluttering and wheezing, struggling to find my breath. In a trice, an ear-piercing, terrified scream blasted across the water and echoed through the trees. I remember being appalled by that sound, until I realized that the scream was coming from me. The creature rose up from the water, standing a foot away from me, giving me a gormless grin, as if he was delighting in our fear. He was breathing on me with a rancid breath that smelt unlike anything I've smelt before or since. Even my stomach convulsed in disgusted revulsion as the taste of bile squirted into the back of my throat, for the smell of this creature, from every single cell in his body, was as pungent as death and decay. The silvery water of the rock pool only came up to the creature's legs. His jaws were locked into a large, open, menacious smile, as the evil black eyes burrowed into me with a look of such hatred that there are no words fitting to describe it. I closed my eyes as tightly as I could to block out his repellent stare, waiting for the end to come, for him to drag me under the water like a crocodile for a second time, to suffocate me. I hoped it would be over very quickly. Eva was completely tongue-tied. She watched this macabre scene unfolding before her. She felt as if she'd slipped outside of her body, like a foot from a sock, watching the whole scene as it played out in our time-space. Every single minute seemed to last for 1,000 years, as the time dragged by so slowly. She had managed to detach herself emotionally from her physical body, like people do in near-death experiences, and she remembers the feeling of being unconcerned of what was to happen to her human shell. I wish I could say I fought back with a valiant vigour and an admirable courage, but alas, I did not. I wish I could say my central nervous system had reacted like a space shuttle in liftoff, but no, my adrenaline was unresponsive to the danger that I was in. I was frozen with a terror so powerful that I had become as rigid as a cold statue. The only thing that would witness the horror we were facing was the trees. The creature grabbed me, and I closed my eyes, And that was when I heard the gunshot. My eyes popped open as my girlfriend screamed. I stared down at the water. It had turned crimson with blood. The creature was dead. I was alive. So was my girlfriend. 3 men in army uniforms came running in the water. They hauled out the great big monstrous wolf-like humanoid. "Are you all right?" asked one of the men. I nodded. "You're very lucky we got here in time. This creature has just killed someone in the local area. You cannot tell anyone what you've seen today. Do you understand?" "Yes, of course," I said. I was so grateful to be alive. One of the men waited for me and my girlfriend to get dressed, and then escorted us back to the cabin. "You will be safe here," we were told. "The creature has now been dealt with. But remember, you saw nothing. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," I said, giving him a salute. "Thank you, sir, for saving our lives. If you hadn't come in time—" "Don't go there. There is no point. I'm glad we could be of help," he told me. I watched the men, whose large army truck was parked outside our cabin, haul the large creature into an oversized plastic body bag that they lowered onto the back of the truck, and then they drove away. Me and my girlfriend had no desire to stay at the idyllic cabin after what had transpired, as I had come so close to losing my life, and maybe Eva would have suffered a similar fate. We knew we needed to get the hell out of there, so we abandoned our glorious retreat and both returned to our homes. My father asked me why I was back from the trip so soon. I told him that Mrs. von Grietesen's son had decided to take the cabin after all. "That's a bummer," said my father. "I tell you what, son, why don't you choose somewhere nice where you want to go? The coast, perhaps? And I'll pay for a lovely weekend for the 2 of you." "Really?" I asked him. "Really," he said. "Don't look so surprised. I may not throw out cash all the time, but in this situation I'm willing to pay for your break." I couldn't believe my father was being so courteously gracious. I have to tell you, I understand what they mean when they say that there is no place like home. There really isn't. I believe what I saw that day was a dogman. That's what I have discovered from all my research into the subject. I still cannot get that creature out of my darkest nightmares. I took my girlfriend to a beach location for a weekend away, all expenses paid by my father. I don't think any time in the near future I shall be booking any fortuitous trips to a wooden cabin anywhere. I've never seen the old woman whose eyes went completely white again, who warned me something was after my blood, and I was in danger. She wasn't wrong about that. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.